In this video, I'm going to show you how to export your motion capture data out of Motive for a binary character. So here I've got someone doing some jumping jacks. All the data should be cleaned, no gaps, no marker swaps prior to doing this. So if I select on the character, and there we go, we can see we've got a nice clean session all the way through. Now you can select certain regions and export only certain amount of frames. For this particular recording, I want to make sure I have a T-pose in somewhere in my exporting, so I can bring that into MotionBuilder, and then also the animation part. So if there's a part of this animation that you don't want, like the end, like the last 100 frames or something like that, you can come in here into the middle of this graph, click with the mouse, left mouse click, and drag out to the amount of frames you want. So you can go up to like 500 frames and then just export that part. So if you take this selection and come up to the actual name of the animation in the projects, and then right click on it and say export tracking data. And here it comes up with the name. Here you want to rename your file. Right here, save as type. You want to make sure we are exporting out as a FBX binary. So FBX binary format is what we want to export this out as. We also can come down here and see what our frames per second is, 120 frames. That's fine. We can come down here and we can also change our frame range right here. Right now in those selections, I'm going from frame 1 to 509. If I want the whole animation, I can cancel out of here and then double click in somewhere in the middle of that selection where the motion paths are, and this will export the whole range out for me if that's what you want. So a couple ways of limiting how much animation you export, but always have that T-pose in somewhere in that animation. All right, so we can bring that in the MotionBuilder and characterize it. All right, so right click, export tracking data. Here we go. Everything looks good. That's the full range of the animation. We're on the binary FBX format. We name it. We want to make sure our units are set to centimeters. Export FBX skeleton. That is set to, we got a drop down menu. We want to make sure that's set to true. And if you named your character or that person that did it, you can actually export that name out, and that should be fine. These are your default settings, and go ahead and save that clip out. So once that's saved, we're going to move over to MotionBuilder. The next step in the process is going to bring our motion file into MotionBuilder to get it characterized for our characters. So we're going to go up to File and then go to Motion File Import, and we're going to find our file, open that up, and it's going to come up with our import box. Pretty much default settings works pretty good here for us, so I'll leave it alone. I'll just say import, and there's our file with our character. Go ahead and play that. Make sure it's running correctly. Let's start zeroing out the joints for our animation file. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I set the timeline back to 0 for our animation. And I also want to make sure that the auto key is turned on inside of MotionBuilder. So if you go to key controls, click on auto key. So again, make sure your cursor is set to 0, auto key is turned on. So every time you rotate something, it automatically sets a key. Now we're going to select all the joints. And then you can see we've got several different things selected. If you don't see this panel, you got to make sure you're under Resources and Properties. Sometimes it's set to Asset Browser. You want properties of those selected joints. And here we've got all the joints selected, and we want to go to hips. So this is the hip joint, and we want to zero out the rotations on that. So that's this column right here. and we've got the X, Y, and Z columns. And we want to go to the very first column here and type in 0. And our character is our motion file is gonna flip out for a little bit here, so don't worry about it. Just keep going through each column here for the rotation and 0 each one out. And there you go. And now the most important thing that it's doing is it's actually zeroing out and facing our motion file and our character towards the positive Z direction, which is really important in the characterization process. So once we've done that, we want to also do the same thing for the joints. So we'll go over to the other joints where these skeletal nodes right here. We'll go to the rotation for those, and we'll zero that to zero everything out for that also. And you can see all the joints are starting to move there. And that last one does a really big change. And there we are. Now we've got all the joints all zeroed out. Now, again, this motion file didn't start at the origin inside of MotionBuilder. So if you want that, you'll have to physically move that. So we can go to the move tool, which is going to be W, and then we just slightly move. It's kind of hard to see that inside of MotionBuilder, but you can see these lines with numbers on them. And that's where those two lines come together in the middle of the grid. That's your origin inside of MotionBuilder. So slowly move that back to the origin if that's what you want. Once you've got that where you want, you can deselect and everything looks good. And again, everything should be set on frame 0. So let's start the characterization process.